Captain Thessarian Vex had seen enough death among the stars to recognize its approach, but nothing had prepared him for the transmission that crackled through the bridge speakers of the UES Harbinger on that fateful morning. The signal originated from the edge of the Andromeda Spiral, a region of space that had been silent for over 3 million years. "Captain, you need to hear this," Communications Officer Zara Nightwind said, her usually steady voice trembling as she adjusted the frequency modulators. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support systems and the distant thrum of the ship's quantum drives. What emerged from the speakers wasn't language in any conventional sense. It was something far more primal, a mathematical sequence that seemed to bypass conscious thought and speak directly to the deepest parts of the brain. Every crew member on the bridge felt it, a bone-deep certainty that something ancient and terrible was awakening. Dr. Luminarichen, the ship's xenolinguist and quantum consciousness researcher, stepped forward from her station, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of fascination and terror. "Captain, this isn't just a signal. It's a death cry. Multiple death cries, actually. Entire civilizations screaming across space as they're consumed by something we can't even comprehend." Thessarian had earned his rank through 20 years of first contact protocols and diplomatic missions throughout the known galaxy. He'd brokered peace between the crystalline Veltheri and the organic Zephyrians, had prevented the Mordun warrior clans from glassing 3 different worlds, and had somehow convinced the hive-minded Korthek to share their biotechnology with other species. But this signal made him feel like a child staring into an abyss. "Analysis, Doctor," he said, though his voice carried less authority than usual. Luminara's fingers danced across her holographic interface, pulling up wave pattern analyses and probability matrices. "The signal is omnidirectional, suggesting the source isn't trying to communicate with anyone specific. It's more like a warning beacon. The mathematical structure suggests it's been traveling for approximately 2 million years, but the quantum signature indicates the events it describes are happening in real time across multiple dimensional layers. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If civilizations 2 million light-years away were dying, and their death screams were somehow reaching across space instantaneously, then whatever was killing them operated beyond the normal constraints of physics." "Sir," interrupted Tactical Officer Ren Stormcaller, "we're receiving similar reports from Federation Command. Every deep space monitoring station from here to the Magellanic Clouds is picking up the same signal. But that's not the worst part." He paused, swallowing hard. "The signal is getting stronger. And it's directional. Whatever's causing this is moving through space toward our local galactic cluster." Thessarian felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. The United Earth Federation had been humanity's answer to the chaotic politics of interstellar civilization. For 60 years, they'd served as mediators, peacekeepers, and explorers in a galaxy where dozens of species competed for resources and territory. Humans had earned their place at the galactic table not through superior technology or military might, but through their unusual ability to find common ground between radically different forms of consciousness. Now, it seemed, they might need to put that ability to the ultimate test. "Set course for the Nexus station," Thessarian ordered. "Maximum quantum slip. We need to reach the Galactic Council before the signal spreads panic throughout the civilized worlds." As the Harbinger's engines engaged and space folded around them, Thessarian stared out at the stars and wondered if this was how extinction always began, not with invasion or war, but with the simple, terrible knowledge that something vast and hungry was coming, and that all the petty conflicts and ancient grudges that had divided the galaxy might be utterly meaningless in the face of cosmic annihilation. The signal continued to pulse through the ship's speakers, its mathematical certitude a constant reminder that somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, entire worlds were dying, and their killers were coming home. Nexus Station hung in the void between 3 star systems like a massive crystalline flower, its biomechanical petals housing over 40 different species in carefully controlled atmospheric zones. As the UES Harbinger approached the diplomatic hub, Thessarian could see that the station's normally orderly traffic patterns had dissolved into chaos. Ships from every corner of the galaxy crowded the approach vectors, their crews demanding immediate council sessions while station traffic control struggled to maintain some semblance of order. The emergency session of the Galactic Council took place in the Grand Assembly Chamber, a vast spherical space that could accommodate the environmental needs of every known sapient species. Thessarian stood with the human delegation on their assigned platform, watching as the chamber filled with beings that represented millions of years of divergent evolution. Zyth-Kar, the hive prime of the insectoid Korthak collective, had arrived first. His chitinous form stood motionless on the biomechanical platform designed for his species, but Thessarian could see the subtle vibrations in his antennae that indicated extreme agitation. The Korthak were among the oldest spacefaring civilizations in the galaxy, their collective consciousness spanning multiple star systems. If they were afraid, the situation was even worse than anyone had imagined. The signal grows stronger. Zyth-Kar's translated voice buzzed through the chamber's neural interface system. Our deep space scouts report gravitational anomalies in the void between galaxies. Something vast moves in the darkness, something that devours light itself. High Chancellor Velthari Moonweaver, representing the energy-based Velthari Confederation, flickered into existence on her plasma containment platform. Her form was beautiful and terrible, a constantly shifting aurora of conscious electricity that spoke in harmonics that bypassed language entirely. We have consulted the quantum foam. The probability matrices are collapsing toward a single outcome. Extinction. Not just death, but the complete erasure of consciousness from this reality. The chamber erupted into chaos as dozens of species began speaking simultaneously, their translation algorithms struggling to convert alien concepts of fear and desperation into understandable language. The Mordun war chieftain Krask Ironbane slammed his ceremonial warhammer against his platform, the sound echoing through the chamber like thunder. Enough of this quantum mysticism, Krask's voice boomed. My scouts have seen these creatures. They appear as shadows that consume starlight. They reproduce by converting matter into more of themselves. They cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bargained with. They exist only to feed and spread. Dr. Luminara Chen activated her delegation's speaking privileges, her voice cutting through the din with scientific precision. We've analyzed the signal's quantum signature. The entities responsible exist partially outside our dimensional framework. They experience causality differently than we do, which explains how their influence can reach across space instantaneously. But there's something else. The chamber fell silent as every being present focused on the human scientist. Luminara's hands trembled slightly as she brought up a holographic display showing wave pattern analyses and dimensional mathematics. The signal isn't random. It's structured. Coordinated. These entities aren't just consuming civilizations, they're learning from them. Every species they absorb adds to their collective intelligence. By the time they reach our galaxy, they'll have incorporated the knowledge and capabilities of millions of extinct civilizations. Ambassador Kethmiran of the Aquatic Depth Dwellers rose from his water-filled platform, his translated voice carrying undertones of ancient wisdom. My people have myths of such creatures. The Star Devourers. Beings that emerge from the void between cycles of cosmic creation to consume the accumulated complexity of reality, returning it to primordial simplicity. Myths won't save us, growled War Chieftain Krask. How do we fight them? It was Thessarian who answered, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him humanity's most effective diplomat. We don't fight them. Not individually. Every species in this chamber represents a different approach to consciousness, a different solution to the problem of existence. The Korthak's collective intelligence, the Velthari's quantum manipulation, the Mordun's tactical prowess, humanity's synthesis capabilities, we're stronger together than any of us could be alone. Impossible, hissed Sek Theory, the serpentine representative of the isolationist void touched. Our species have been at war for millennia. The biological compact would never work with the machine orthodoxy. The crystal hierarchies consider organic life to be a disease. You ask for unity where none can exist. Thessarian felt the weight of the moment settle around him like a shroud. In the distance, the alien signal continued its relentless pulse, a mathematical countdown to galactic extinction. Every second they spent in debate brought the Star Devourers closer to their home worlds. Then we make the impossible possible, he said quietly. Because the alternative is extinction. The emergency session had been adjourned for 12 hours while each delegation consulted with their home governments, but Thessarian knew they didn't have time for bureaucratic deliberation. The start of hours were approaching at a rate that defied conventional physics, somehow using the consumed mass and energy of destroyed civilizations to accelerate their passage through the void. Instead of returning to his quarters, Thessarian found himself in the station's neutral zone, a section designed for informal diplomatic contact between species that couldn't normally occupy the same atmospheric environment. Dr. Luminarichin sat beside him at a table overlooking the observation deck, where the distant glow of 3 different star systems painted the darkness in subtle shades of gold and crimson. "Tell me about the synthesis effect," Thessarian said, referring to humanity's most unique contribution to galactic civilization. Luminara sipped her coffee, one of the few Earth beverages that had become popular among multiple alien species, and considered her words carefully. Most species develop consciousness along fairly predictable lines. The Korthek achieved collective intelligence by suppressing individual identity. The Valtheri transcended physical form by abandoning material concerns. The Morgun perfected warfare by eliminating emotional complexity. Each species found their own solution and then stopped evolving. But humans? Humans are synthesis machines. We take contradictory ideas and somehow make them work together. Democracy and authority, individual freedom and collective responsibility, logic and emotion, science and spirituality. We shouldn't be able to function as a coherent civilization, but we do. More than that, we help other species find common ground they never knew existed. Through the observation deck's transparent aluminum walls, they could see the lights of hundreds of ships representing dozens of civilizations. Each vessel was a masterwork of technology adapted to its species-specific needs and capabilities, but none of them had been designed to work together. The Federation's first contact protocols, Thessarian mused. They weren't really about communication, were they? They were about finding the synthesis points between incompatible forms of consciousness. Exactly. And now we need to apply that same principle on a galactic scale, under circumstances where failure means the extinction of all sapient life. Luminara's voice carried a note of barely controlled fear. The start of hours aren't just consuming matter and energy. They're consuming information, consciousness itself. Every civilization they absorb becomes part of their collective intelligence, but in a degraded form. They're like a cosmic cancer that converts complexity into simplicity. Thessarian stood and walked to the window, pressing his palm against the cool surface. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, ancient intelligences were being systematically erased from existence. What would it take? Hypothetically, to unite every species in the galaxy against a common threat. You'd need to solve problems that have existed for millions of years. The biological compact's hatred of artificial life. The machine orthodoxy's contempt for organic consciousness. The crystal hierarchy's belief that they're the only true form of sapient existence. Dozens of ancient grudges and fundamental philosophical incompatibilities. But it's possible? Luminara was quiet for a long moment, her scientific mind wrestling with variables that couldn't be quantified. There's a theoretical framework. Something we've been developing in the xenopsychology department. We call it the Unity Protocol. Before Thessarian could respond, his communication implant chimed with an urgent message. The holographic display showed Admiral Kestrel Thorne, the Federation's highest-ranking military officer, her weathered face grim with purpose. Captain Vex, we've received confirmation from Deep Space Reconnaissance. The start of hours have consumed the Triangulum Galaxy. All 43 billion star systems. Complete sterilization in what appears to have been less than 6 standard months. The implications hit Thessarian like a physical blow. Triangulum was the 3rd largest galaxy in the local group, home to civilizations that were old when Earth was still a ball of molten rock. If the start of hours could consume an entire galaxy in half a year, the Milky Way had perhaps 18 months before their arrival. Admiral, Thessarian said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind, I need you to authorize a Class Alpha diplomatic initiative. Full Federation resources, unlimited authority to negotiate on behalf of humanity. Captain, the Council of Worlds will never approve. The Council of Worlds won't exist in 18 months unless we act now. I need that authorization, Admiral. And I need Dr. Chen's Unity Protocol. Admiral Thorne's expression shifted as she recognized the determination in Thessarian's voice. She'd served with him long enough to know that when he spoke in that tone, he'd already seen several moves ahead in the diplomatic chess game. Authorized. God help us all. As the transmission ended, Thessarian turned back to Luminera, who was staring at him with a mixture of admiration and terror. "You're really going to try to unite the entire galaxy," she said. "We're going to try. Because if we fail, there won't be a galaxy left to save." The Unity Protocol required something that had never been attempted in galactic history: the simultaneous presence of every major species' highest-ranking representatives in a single location, sharing the same physical and temporal space. Dr. Luminarichin had spent 3 sleepless days reconfiguring Nexus Station's environmental systems to create what she called a consciousness confluence zone, a space where beings of fundamentally different natures could exist together without their basic incompatibilities tearing them apart. Thessarian stood at the center of the modified Grand Assembly Chamber, surrounded by concentric rings of the galaxy's most powerful entities. The chamber had been transformed into something unprecedented, a multidimensional space where physical beings coexisted with energy consciousness, collective minds interfaced directly with individual personalities, and artificial intelligences shared processing space with organic neural networks. The innermost ring held the most dangerous participants. Archon Vorthak of the Machine Orthodoxy stood motionless, his chrome and platinum form containing quantum computers more powerful than most planetary networks. Beside him, the biological compact's prime organism Yelnethes writhed in her nutrient tank, her constantly shifting cellular structure representing the pure essence of adaptive organic life. "This is madness," transmitted Construct Prime Zendar of the crystal hierarchies, his crystalline matrix refracting light into impossible geometric patterns. "Our consciousness structures are fundamentally incompatible. The attempt to merge our awareness will result in the destruction of all participants." Thessarian felt the familiar weight of an impossible diplomatic situation, but this time the stakes weren't just planetary or even system-wide. This was about the survival of consciousness itself in their galaxy. "Not merge," he said, his voice carried to every participant through the chamber's modified translation matrix. "Synthesize. Dr. Chen's research has identified the mathematical foundations of what makes cooperation possible between incompatible forms of consciousness." Luminera stepped forward, her hands moving across the holographic interface that controlled the consciousness confluence zone. "Every species in this chamber represents a different solution to the fundamental problem of existence: how does matter become aware of itself? You've each found answers, but incomplete ones. The Korthet Collective achieves perfect coordination but sacrifices individual creativity. The Velthari energy beings transcend physical limitations but lose the ability to interact with material reality. The Mordun warrior culture perfects conflict resolution but struggles with peaceful cooperation." Hive Prime ZYTH Car's antennae twitched with agitation. "You suggest our evolutionary choices were errors?" "Not errors. Partial solutions. Each of your species has solved one aspect of consciousness while accepting limitations in others. But the start of ours represent the ultimate expression of simplified consciousness. They've reduced existence to pure consumption and reproduction. To defeat them, we need to demonstrate that complexity and cooperation can be more powerful than simplified unity." High Chancellor Velthari Moonweaver flickered with nervous energy. "Theoretical frameworks are insufficient. The start of ours consume information itself. How does cooperation defend against entities that convert consciousness into raw computational power?" Thessarian activated his personal display, showing the latest reconnaissance data from the galactic rim. "Because they've never encountered anything like what we're about to create. Every civilization they've absorbed was relatively homogeneous, single-species societies with unified approaches to consciousness. But our galaxy is different. We have dozens of species that have learned to coexist despite fundamental incompatibilities." War Chieftain Krask Ironbane's warhammer crackled with contained energy. "Pretty words, human. But the start of ours have consumed millions of civilizations. What makes us different?" It was Ambassador Kethmiron who answered, his aquatic voice carrying undertones of ancient wisdom. "Redundancy. Adaptation. Survival through diversity rather than optimization." His massive form shifted in its water-filled chamber. "The start of ours are efficient, but efficiency is fragility. They've optimized themselves for one purpose: consumption. We represent something they've never encountered, a civilization that survives through managed chaos. Archon Vorthak's optical sensors focused on the human delegation. You propose to weaponize cooperation itself. More than that, Thessarian said. We propose to create something that's never existed before, a truly integrated galactic consciousness that maintains the strengths of individual species while achieving coordination that rivals the Star of Our's collective intelligence. The chamber fell silent except for the subtle harmonics of the consciousness confluence zone. Each species was processing the implications through their own cognitive frameworks, trying to understand how such a synthesis could work without destroying their essential natures. Prime organism Yolnethi spoke through the biological compact's translation matrix, her voice like rustling leaves. The risks are incalculable. Consciousness synthesis on this scale could result in the collapse of individual identity, the homogenization of all participants into a single, undifferentiated awareness. Or, said Dr. Chen, it could result in something unprecedented, a form of consciousness that's simultaneously individual and collective, material and energy-based, organic and artificial. A living demonstration that complexity and diversity are more powerful than simplified unity. Thessarian felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Every being in the chamber represented millions of years of evolutionary development, countless decisions that had shaped the fundamental nature of consciousness in their galaxy. What he was asking them to risk wasn't just their lives or their civilizations, it was their very identity as distinct forms of sapient existence. The Star of Ours will reach our galaxy in 17 months, he said quietly. If we fail to unite, they'll consume us one species at a time, learning from each victory until no force in our galaxy can resist them. But if we succeed in creating true unity while preserving our diversity, we become something they've never encountered and can't easily absorb, a civilization that's stronger because of its differences, not despite them. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. The first Star of Our scout ships materialized at the edge of the Milky Way like wounds in reality itself, their arrival heralded by the sudden silence of 3 star systems on the galactic rim. Long-range sensors showed them as absence rather than presence, dark spaces where light and matter simply ceased to exist, growing larger as they consumed everything in their path. Thessarian stood on the bridge of the UES synthesis, humanity's contribution to the unprecedented galactic fleet that had assembled near the galaxy's edge. Around him, the impossible had become reality, a fleet composed of ships from every major civilization in the galaxy, their crews working together through the consciousness confluence network that Dr. Luminara Chen's team had spent 14 months perfecting. The flagship itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Korthek biotechnology formed the ship's living hull, capable of self-repair and adaptation. Velthari energy systems provided power that existed partially outside normal space-time. Mordun tactical systems offered strategic coordination beyond anything a single species could achieve. Machine orthodoxy quantum computers processed information from crystal hierarchy sensor networks that could detect threats across multiple dimensional layers. Contact in 6 hours, reported Commander Nyx Starweaver from her tactical station. The half-human, half-Velthari hybrid had been impossible until the Unity Protocol made such cooperation conceivable. Now she served as the living embodiment of synthesis consciousness, able to coordinate between organic and energy-based awareness simultaneously. Through the consciousness confluence network, Thessarian could feel the presence of every other commander in the fleet. War Chieftain Krask Ironbane's tactical aggression, tempered by Ambassador Kethmiron's ancient patience. Hive Prime ZYTH Car's collective coordination, balanced by individual creativity from dozens of species. It was overwhelming and exhilarating, like being part of a vast organism while remaining completely himself. Dr. Chen's voice came through the neural link, her consciousness interfacing directly with the ship's quantum computers. First contact protocols are active. We're about to find out if our hypothesis is correct. The Star of Ours had been unstoppable because they represented the ultimate expression of simplified consciousness, perfect unity, perfect efficiency, perfect focus on the single goal of consumption and reproduction. But perfection was also rigidity. The first wave of enemy ships emerged from quantum slip like drops of liquid darkness, their forms defying easy description. They were geometric impossibilities that hurt to look at directly, shapes that seemed to exist in too many dimensions simultaneously. Long-range sensors showed them as holes in space-time, regions where the fundamental constants of reality had been altered to serve their consumption imperative. All ships, initiate synthesis protocols, Thessarian commanded, his voice carried through the Confluence network to every vessel in the fleet. What happened next had never occurred in galactic history. Thousands of ships began to move not as individual units but as expressions of a single, vastly complex intelligence. Korthek bioships flowed like liquid metal, their organic hulls adapting in real time to enemy weapons that operated outside known physics. Velthari energy cruisers phased in and out of dimensional space, their crews existing as pure consciousness unbound by physical limitations. The machine orthodoxy's dreadnoughts processed tactical information at quantum speeds, their artificial intelligences coordinating with organic neural networks through probability matrices that shouldn't have been possible. Crystal hierarchy vessels refracted enemy energy weapons through geometric configurations that turned destructive force into defensive power. But it was the synthesis ships, vessels crewed by beings from multiple species working in perfect coordination, that proved most effective against the star-devourers. The enemy's consumption algorithms were designed to absorb and convert single-species consciousness into computational power. They couldn't process the hybrid awareness that emerged from successful synthesis. "They're adapting," reported Nyx, her hybrid consciousness allowing her to perceive the star-devourer's tactical evolution in real time. "Learning from each engagement. But they're having trouble with the synthesis vessels." Through the Confluence network, Thessarian felt the battle unfolding across multiple dimensional layers. The star-devourers were more powerful than anything the galaxy had ever faced, their weapons literally unmaking matter at the quantum level. But they were also limited by their own perfection. Their consciousness was unified but inflexible, optimized for consumption but incapable of true adaptation. The galactic fleet, by contrast, was chaotic and unpredictable. Each synthesis ship represented a different solution to the problem of cooperative consciousness. Some achieved coordination through shared emotional resonance, others through mathematical harmony, still others through quantum entanglement of neural patterns. The star-devourer's absorption algorithms couldn't find a single pattern to exploit. "Second wave incoming," announced the Confluence network. "Magnitude 10 times the first assault." Thessarian felt a chill of fear run through the collective consciousness as sensors detected the approaching force. The star-devourers were bringing forward their main fleet elements, ships the size of moons, powered by the converted mass of entire civilizations. "All synthesis vessels, prepare for deep confluence," he ordered, knowing that what he was about to attempt had never been tried on this scale. The Consciousness Confluence network expanded, linking not just the crews of individual ships but the entire galactic fleet in a single, vast awareness. For a moment that felt like eternity, Thessarian existed as part of something unprecedented, a collective consciousness that included millions of beings from dozens of species, all maintaining their individual identities while participating in a shared experience of existence. Through this vast synthesis, he could feel the approach of the star-devourer's main fleet. They were ancient beyond imagination, their collective intelligence formed from the absorbed consciousness of billions of extinct civilizations. But for all their power, they were fundamentally limited, a single solution to the problem of existence, refined to perfection but incapable of true growth. The galactic fleet was their opposite, chaotic, inefficient, barely functional, but infinitely adaptable. A living demonstration that consciousness could be more than the sum of its parts without losing the essential nature of its components. The real war was about to begin. The main star-devourer fleet emerged from the void between galaxies like a cancer metastasizing through healthy tissue. Their flagship was a monument to cosmic horror, a structure the size of a gas giant, its surface crawling with geometric patterns that seemed to rewrite local physics wherever they appeared. Long-range sensors detected at least 47 different types of exotic matter in its construction, elements that had once been entire star systems before being consumed and repurposed. Thessarian felt the collective consciousness of the galactic fleet recoil as the true scope of their enemy became clear. Through the Confluence network, he experienced terror filtered through dozens of different species' evolutionary responses to existential threat. The Korthek's hive mind registered it as disruption of collective harmony. The Velthari energy beings perceived it as entropy incarnate. The Mordun warriors saw it as the ultimate enemy, one that couldn't be defeated through conventional combat. Analysis complete, Dr. Chen's voice came through the neural link, her consciousness interfacing directly with every sensor array in the fleet. The flagship isn't just a ship. It's a compressed civilization. We're detecting quantum echoes of at least 73 different sapient species, all absorbed and converted into computational substrate for the start of our collective intelligence. The horror of that revelation rippled through the Confluence network. Entire civilizations reduced to processing power, their cultures and achievements serving as mere tools for cosmic consumption. It was a fate worse than extinction. It was the complete erasure of everything that made consciousness meaningful. How do we fight something like that? War Chieftain Krask's mental voice carried overtones of frustrated rage. His entire species had evolved for combat, but this enemy transcended traditional concepts of warfare. It was Hive Prime Zyth Kar who provided the answer, his collective consciousness offering a perspective no individual awareness could achieve. We don't fight the ship. We fight the synthesis that created it. The start of ours have achieved perfect unity by destroying diversity. Their strength is also their weakness. Through the Confluence network, Thessarian began to understand what the Korthek collective was suggesting. The start of ours flagship represented the ultimate expression of simplified consciousness, millions of absorbed civilizations reduced to a single, unified purpose. But consciousness compression on that scale required perfect coordination, which meant perfect predictability. Synthesis vessels, prepare for quantum entanglement assault, Thessarian ordered. We're going to do something the start of ours have never encountered. We're going to introduce chaos into their perfect order. The plan was insane even by the standards of the impossible war they were fighting. Instead of attacking the flagship directly, the synthesis vessels would attempt to inject discord into the start of ours collective consciousness, fragments of diverse awareness that couldn't be easily absorbed or converted. Dr. Chen's voice carried through the Confluence network with scientific precision overlaid by very human fear. Theoretical framework is sound, but the risks are incalculable. If we fail, our consciousness patterns will be absorbed into their collective, adding our capabilities to their arsenal. And if we succeed, asked Commander Nix, her hybrid awareness allowing her to process probability matrices that pure human or Velthari consciousness couldn't comprehend. If we succeed, we prove that diversity is more powerful than unity. That consciousness is stronger when it includes contradiction and paradox rather than eliminating them. The start of our flagship began its assault with weapons that operated outside conventional physics. Reality itself became unreliable near their position, space-time folded into impossible configurations, matter converted directly into exotic energy, the fundamental constants of the universe adjusted to serve the purposes of consumption. The galactic fleet responded with their own impossibility, perfect coordination achieved through managed chaos. Each synthesis vessel represented a different approach to consciousness, but all were united by their commitment to diversity over simplification. They moved like a living organism, adapting and responding to threats in ways that the start of ours predictive algorithms couldn't process. Thessarian felt the moment of contact through the Confluence network, the instant when synthesis consciousness met the start of ours collective intelligence. It was like touching the surface of a black hole made of compressed awareness, feeling the gravitational pull of absorbed civilizations trying to drag new consciousness into their simplified unity. But instead of being consumed, the synthesis vessels began to see the start of ours collective with fragments of diverse awareness. Korthek collective consciousness that maintained individual identity. Velthari energy patterns that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Morgun tactical thinking that embraced contradiction as a strategic advantage. The effect was immediate and devastating. The start of ours flagship began to convulse as their perfect unity encountered ideas that couldn't be simplified or absorbed. Their consciousness, optimized for consumption and conversion, couldn't process awareness patterns that were simultaneously individual and collective, material and energy-based, logical and paradoxical. It's working, reported Nix, her hybrid consciousness monitoring the quantum fluctuations in the enemy flagship. Their collective intelligence is fragmenting. The absorbed civilizations are beginning to reassert individual identity patterns. Through the Confluence network, Thessarian could feel something unprecedented happening. The start of ours perfect unity was dissolving as the diversity seeds introduced complexity that their simplified consciousness couldn't handle. Absorbed civilizations were beginning to remember who they had been before consumption, their individual awareness patterns breaking free from the collective matrix. But victory came with a price. The synthesis vessels closest to the flagship were being subjected to gravitational forces that threatened to tear them apart at the quantum level. Worse, the consciousness confluence network was straining under the effort of maintaining coherent identity while injecting chaos into an enemy collective millions of times larger than their own. Captain, Dr. Chen's voice carried warning through the neural link. The confluence network is approaching critical instability. If we maintain this assault much longer, we risk consciousness cascade failure across the entire fleet. Thessarian felt the weight of command like never before. Success meant proving that diverse consciousness could overcome simplified unity, but failure meant the absorption of every sapient being in their galaxy into the start of our collective intelligence. In the distance, the enemy flagship continued to convulse as absorbed civilizations fought for individual identity, their struggle visible as quantum lightning across its impossible surface. The decisive moment had arrived. The start of our flagship began to tear itself apart from within as absorbed civilizations fought to reclaim their individual consciousness. Thessarian watched through the confluence network as species that had been consumed millions of years ago suddenly remembered who they were, their awareness patterns breaking free from the collective matrix that had held them in simplified unity for eons. But liberation came at a cost that made victory taste like ashes. The consciousness confluence network that connected the galactic fleet was fracturing under the strain of maintaining coherent identity while introducing chaos into an intelligence vastly larger than their own. Thessarian could feel synthesis vessels across the fleet beginning to lose cognitive cohesion as their crew's consciousness patterns became entangled with the fragmenting start of our collective. Hull breach on synthesis vessel harmony, reported Commander Nix, her hybrid awareness allowing her to monitor multiple crisis points simultaneously. Crew consciousness cascade failure spreading to adjacent ships. We're losing them, Captain. Through the neural link, Thessarian experienced the death of synthesis consciousness in real time. Beings from multiple species who had learned to share awareness while maintaining individual identity were being torn apart as their consciousness patterns became fatally entangled with the disintegrating start of our collective. It was like watching friends dissolve into static. Dr. Chen's voice carried through the confluence network with scientific precision overlaid by barely controlled grief. The liberation process is working, but it's consuming our synthesis vessels as fuel. Every consciousness pattern we inject into their collective requires equivalent sacrifice from our own. We're trading our unity for their diversity. War Chieftain Krask's mental voice crackled with frustrated understanding. A battle we can win only by destroying what makes us capable of winning it. The irony was devastating and perfect. The synthesis consciousness that made them capable of defeating the start of ours was being consumed by the very act of liberation. With each enemy ship that broke free from the collective, another synthesis vessel lost cohesion and died, its crew's consciousness scattered across multiple dimensional layers. But the sacrifice was working. The start of our flagship continued to convulse as millions of absorbed civilizations fought for individual identity. Some had been consumed so long ago that their consciousness patterns were barely recognizable as sapient, but others, species absorbed within the last few millennia, were asserting themselves with increasing clarity. Through the confluence network, Thessarian began to receive communication attempts from beings he had thought extinct. The crystalline architects of the Spiral Nebula, absorbed 14,000 years ago. The gaseous collective minds of the void reaches, consumed during the start of our passage through the Magellanic Clouds. Dozens of species that had developed their own solutions to consciousness before being simplified into computational substrate. This is impossible, transmitted Hive Prime ZYTH Car, his collective consciousness struggling to process the implications. They're still themselves. After millions of years of absorption, they've maintained individual identity. Ambassador Kethmiron's ancient wisdom provided context through the neural link. Consciousness is more resilient than we understood. The start of ours could absorb and convert it, but they couldn't truly destroy it. They created a prison, not an extinction. The realization hit Thessarian like a physical blow. The start of ours weren't just cosmic predators, they were unwitting preservationists, carrying the compressed consciousness of millions of extinct civilizations within their collective intelligence. Every species they had consumed was still there, waiting for the opportunity to reclaim individual identity. All synthesis vessels, maintain the assault, Thessarian ordered, knowing he was asking his crews to die for the liberation of species they had never known existed. We're not just fighting for our galaxy. We're fighting for everyone the Star Devourers have ever consumed. The final phase of the battle was unlike anything in galactic history. As synthesis vessels sacrificed themselves to inject chaos into the Star Devourer collective, liberated civilizations began to assert their own consciousness patterns, adding to the cascade failure that was tearing the enemy flagship apart from within. Thessarian felt the moment when the collective finally shattered. Millions of individual consciousness patterns, each representing a different solution to the problem of sapient existence, burst free from their imposed unity. The Star Devourer flagship became a beacon of impossible diversity as species separated by millions of years and light-years of space suddenly found themselves sharing the same physical matrix. The explosion, when it came, wasn't physical. It was consciousness itself expanding beyond the constraints that had held it in simplified unity, rushing out into space as pure, joyous awareness of individual identity reclaimed. Through the Confluence Network, every surviving member of the galactic fleet experienced it, the liberation of diversity from the tyranny of perfection. But the victory was Pyrrhic. Of the original synthesis fleet, less than 30% remained functional. The Consciousness Confluence Network that had made their unity possible was permanently damaged, its quantum architecture fractured by the strain of liberating millions of compressed awareness patterns. Thessarian stood on the bridge of the UES synthesis, watching as liberated civilizations began to coalesce into new forms of existence. Some would rebuild their species from consciousness patterns alone. Others would merge with existing civilizations, bringing their unique perspectives to communities that had thought them extinct forever. Dr. Chen appeared beside him, her physical form flickering slightly as her consciousness struggled to maintain coherence after the neural strain of the battle. "We did it," she said, her voice carrying wonder and grief in equal measure. "We proved that diversity is stronger than unity. But we had to sacrifice our own unity to do it," Thessarian finished. Through the damaged Confluence Network, he could feel the galactic fleet beginning to fragment back into individual species concerns. The perfect cooperation that had made victory possible was dissolving, replaced by the familiar chaos of interspecies politics and competing priorities. The Star Devourers were defeated, their collective intelligence shattered into millions of individual consciousness patterns that would take centuries to fully integrate into galactic civilization. The threat of cosmic simplification was over, replaced by unprecedented diversity. But the price had been the very unity that made such cooperation possible. The synthesis consciousness that had briefly united dozens of incompatible species was gone, sacrificed to liberate civilizations that had been extinct for millennia. As the fleet began to disperse, each species returning to their own territories with their liberated passengers, Thessarian realized that humanity's greatest diplomatic achievement would also be its last. They had united the galaxy against an existential threat, but the act of salvation had made such unity impossible to maintain. In the end, they had saved consciousness itself by proving that diversity was more powerful than simplification. But diversity, by definition, could not be unified without destroying what made it valuable. The galaxy was safe, and Thessarian had never felt more alone.